this video we're going to be looking at solving multi-step equations, but now we're going to look at when the variable's on both sides. So let's quickly go over the steps. And if you've seen the last video I made over solving multi-step equations with the variable on one side, you'll notice these steps are pretty much the same. I'd probably go check that out if you haven't already, but let's go through the steps. So the first thing we're going to do is distribute. All right. Second, we're going to combine our like terms. So combine like terms. My handwriting's sloppy, so don't judge. The third step, now since the variable's on both sides, we actually need to move the variable to one side. So you have to move variable to one side. So move variable to one side, which that is not how you spell one. It has an N, not an M. All right. So one side. And then the last step now is to just solve. Pretty much after you do steps 1 through 3, you're going to have either a 1 or a 2-step equation for step 4. So this is pretty much the easiest step. It's the solving step. So now let's go through some examples. So we're going to start off a little bit easier. You can probably do some of these if you pause the video, but let's do it and we'll work our way up. So 5y minus 8 equals 3y plus 12. So let's go through our steps. So step 1, distribute. So let's look at either side of the equal sign. On the left side, do you see anywhere we need to distribute? Hopefully you're saying no because there's no parentheses. Same thing on the right side, no parentheses, no distribution. So now let's go to step 2, which is combine like terms. Is 5y and 8, are those like terms? And the answer is no, because 8 doesn't have a y. They have to have the same variable and exponent. So since 8's missing the y, they can't add or subtract. Same thing on the right side. 12 doesn't have a y, so we can't add or subtract 3y and 12. So now we're ready for step 3, which is we want to move the variable to one side. So first let's find the variable. You'll see there's a y on the left and a y on the right. Now, you're actually going to move the coefficient and the variable together, okay? So I usually like to move my variables to the left, but you can also move it to the right. I'm just going to stick with mostly moving my variables to the left, which means I need to move y, but not just y. I need to move the coefficient and the variable. So I want to move 3y. Now, the important distinction here to make is I never said I was going to separate 3 and y. If I wanted to separate 3 and y, I would divide. But that's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to move this whole piece. So view 3y as if it were one whole piece. So I want to make that, well, if I'm adding here in the middle between 3y and 12, that means that I could subtract 3y by 3y, and I could get 0, which would then be the inverse operation. All right, it's going to take a little getting used to if this is your first time. But once again, the easiest way I can describe it is to view 3y, the coefficient and the variable, view it as one piece. Try not to think about separating 3 and y. Try to think about moving 3y by itself. Well, the whole piece by itself. So now, what we do to one side, we're going to do to the other side. And now 3y minus 3y is just going to equal 0. 5y minus 3y, those are like terms. Now, notice that I did not put this 3y over or under 8. Here's why. 3y and 8 are not like terms. So there's no reason to even stack this under. Like, let me go back. There's no reason to even stack this under 8 because you're just going to confuse yourself. So stack your like terms. That way you can help yourself out to not make any mistakes. All right, so now 5y minus 3y, we say 5 minus 3 is 2, and then we just bring down our coefficient y. Negative 8 comes down, or minus 8 comes down, and then we have equals 12. And I can just get rid of the plus 12 because we know plus 12 means positive 12. So now, if you notice, this is just a 2-step equation. I need to get y isolated on the left So I need to get rid of 2 and negative 8. We've already established this in other videos, but we'll talk about it again. You usually want to move the plus or minus 8 part first, or do the adding or subtracting first. How do we get rid of minus 8? We add 8. What we do to one side, we do to the other. So now that's going to cancel, make 0. 2y is going to equal 12 plus 8 is 20. And now our last step, how do we get rid of this coefficient 2 out or away from this y? So what does that mean? 2 and y are multiplied, so we're going to divide by 2 on both sides. So then y equals 20 divided by 2 is 10. All right, hopefully that seems fairly simple. I think the hard part is this part right here or this part right here, but we'll do a couple more. You'll get used to this. So let's try another. Let's go with, let's actually do something where we have to distribute. No, yeah, let's do some distribute. All right, so let's say we want to do 3 times 6p minus 1 equals 11p minus 45. All right, so you can also try to pause this and see if you can do it. I bet a lot of you could, but let's go through it. So now, our first step, you're going to get used to doing this with any equation. Our first step is, if there's distribution, we have to do that first. So let's look at the left side. Do we need to distribute this 3 to 6p and to negative 1? Yeah, because there's a parentheses. There's 3 on the outside. If we multiply a 3 times this whole parentheses, we have to distribute. All right, so 3 times 6 is 18, and then we bring down our variable p. Then 3 times 1 is 3, but be careful, there's a negative here. So that would be negative 1 times 3, which is negative 3, or we can just change that to minus 3. Bring down our equal sign. On the right side, 11p and negative 45, there's no distribution, and those aren't like terms. So we just bring those down exactly like they look. All right, so let's go to our next step. 18p minus 3 equals 11p minus 45. Once again, we've already established that the right side are not like terms. What about the left side? Could I do 18p minus 3? No, because 3 needs to have p in order to subtract here. But since it does not have p, we can't combine those terms. Or we're pretty much saying they're not like terms. So now, what's our next step? We need to get the variable on one side. So once again, look at your coefficient, or just find your variable first, and then you can figure out the coefficient. So our variables are p. If you notice, there's a p on each side. We want p to be on one side. And once again, I'm just going to stick with doing the same routine. I'm going to move this right side p over here to the left. But here's what you have to be careful for, or be careful with. I'm not just moving p. I'm moving the coefficient and the variable p. So I'm moving 11p. That's one whole piece. And if 11p and 45 are being subtracted, essentially that means I want to make 11p become 0. How could I do that? How could I make 11p become 0 if I add or subtract something to 11p? I could subtract 11p. And then what I do to one side, I do to the other side. So now that's going to cancel, because if you think about it, 11 minus 11 is 0, and that would give me 0p. 0 times p is just 0. So that's why this cancels. Okay. So then 18p minus 11p gives me 7p minus 3 equals, and then a lot of people will say 45. But be careful. To the left of 45, there's a minus sign, so that negative sign or minus sign has to come down and become a negative sign. All right, so let me restart this. That way I have plenty of room. Let's say 7p minus 3 equals negative 45. Let me double check that that's right. Yeah. All right. So now we're to the fourth step, which is solve. Our job is to isolate p, so 7 needs to go and 3 needs to go. Which one do we want to deal with first? It would be 3 because it's added or subtracted. So how would we do the opposite, or what is the opposite of minus 3? It's plus 3. We're going to do that to both sides. 7p equals negative 45 plus 3 is negative 42. Then our final step, how do we get rid of p and move it away from, how do we get rid of 7 and move it away from p? This is 7 times p, so we would divide by 7 on both sides. So p is equal to negative 42 divided by positive 7. It's going to give me a negative 6. Let me double check that that's right. That is right. Let's do one more just for the sake of trying to show you one that may be a little bit more difficult. All right, let's do one more. And we're going to do, let's use green, even though I hate the color green, but that's okay. All right, so 2 times 4w minus 1 equals negative 10 times w minus 3 equals, wait, what the heck am I thinking? It'd be plus 4. All right, so now, see if you can do this one. This one's a little bit longer, but all I really did was add in an extra distribution step. So we're going to start out looking at the left and the right, and we're looking for anywhere that we need to distribute. The left side, 2 times this whole parentheses needs to be distributed. So 2 is going to multiply by 4w, which gives me 8w. 2 times negative 1 is going to give me negative 2, so we would say minus 2. Now, in the last problem, we pretty much got to do this and go to the next steps. But if you look at the right side, we also need to distribute this negative 10 to w and negative 3. So it would give me negative 10w. Now, this is a negative 10 times a negative 3, so that would give me a positive or plus 30. And then we have plus 4. Now we're ready for combining like terms. So let's do that. So on the left side is 8w and 2. Are those like terms? No, they're not. What about on the right side? Negative 10w, does that have a like term? No, it does not. What about 30 and 4? Can I add those two? Yeah, it just gives me, let's see, 30 plus 4 is going to give me plus 34. All right, so now let's get our variable on one side if it's on both sides of the equation. So is my variable w, is that on both sides of the equation? Or on both sides of the equation? Yeah, it is. So we want to make our variable or move it to one side. Now remember, you're not just going to move the variable. You're going to move the coefficient and the variable. So I'm going to move negative 10w, that whole thing. Now, once again, if this is added, that means I need to either add or subtract something to this negative 10w. I need to add or subtract something to get that negative 10w to 0. I need to add or subtract negative 10w by something to make it 0. What could I do? If I have negative 10w, what could I do with that? I could add 10w, and then I would add 10w to this side. That's going to cancel. Negative 10 plus 10 is 0. 0w is just 0. All right? 8w plus 10w is 18w. Minus 2 comes down, and then 34 also comes down. So we have 18w minus 2 equals 34. Let's restart. That way I can make this look a little bit nicer. And what did we say? 34? All right. So now we're in the final stages. We've got our variable on one side, so now we can start solving this. We need to move 18 and 2 to isolate w. Which one needs to go first? It's going to be the minus 2. So we're going to add 2. That's the opposite operation. 18w comes down. 34 plus 2 is going to equal 36. And then our final step, how do we get rid of 18 away from w if they're right beside each other? Or if it's a coefficient? Well, they're multiplied, so the opposite of that would be dividing. So we're dividing by 18, so w will equal 2, I believe. Yep. All right, so now, once again, this These examples are just examples where the variable is on both sides. So if it's on both sides, you really just have to make sure you add in this extra step. So you're still going to do three steps, but then you have one more extra. So first you're going to distribute, I'll abbreviate it. Then you're going to combine your like terms. So like terms. Step 3 now, we have to make sure we move the variable to one side. So move variable to one side. And then the last step is the best step or the easiest step, which is solve.